But I think if you're experiencing what you feel is bullying, abuse in your healthcare situation, whether that's a medical student, a resident, maybe even attending getting abused by their administration above them, there's probably even a culture of bullying there too, right? Or nurses, MAs, really whoever. I think you have to be willing to stick up for yourself and be, in a sense, like a whistleblower. But if you're going to be a whistleblower, do it in a very professional manner. Sleep on it. Have your significant other take a look at that formal complaint before you fire it off to administration or whoever. There are certain channels that you can make anonymous complaints, or you can do it not anonymously. But I think it's doing it so in a professional manner, and sleeping on it is my best attitude and best
Right. Make sure
advice.
it's not driven by emotions.
Right.
Sleep on it, think through it logically, and if it still warrants that type of response, certainly, I would even go far as to say the responsibility is on you to take that action, to contribute to bettering the system that we have right now. And with that said, do you have any stories? Do you feel comfortable sharing any
Yeah, I
stories?
mean, it's there was the situation where I had this attending who was, I thought very unprofessional, calling me names, trying to put me down in front of other
What kind of names?
dumbass,
Oh my goodness.
incompetent. You need to be much further ahead of where you are. And I look, some of those criticisms might have been even fair. I'm not here to say that I'm the strongest medicine resident. Of course not. I'm a psychiatry resident. But I think it comes down to professionalism. How the message was delivered, I think was in such egregious unprofessional nature that it motivated, as similar to you. I had days where I didn't want to go into work. It was in the worst work environment I've really been a part of. And this individual had kind of a reputation amongst this entire hospital for being like that. And I know I wasn't the first person to complain. But I remember coming home to my wife and discussing my really horrific experiences and how it wasn't a good learning experience for me. It was just a waste of time, how I kind of thought of it. But I remember sitting down and talking to some administrators that I really did respect, and they encouraged me, hey, look, if you really feel strongly about this and want there to be a change, you have to be someone that's willing to take a stand and are willing to be a whistleblower and say, like, no, that this is not okay. And I remember, like I said kind of earlier, I took my time writing this complaint. I figured out how I could say it without being in myself too emotional or unprofessional in nature. I wanted to be the utmost professional when I made this complaint because it's going to be better well received. And so I think that's really, if you find yourself in that situation, I encourage you to do the same thing. Be willing to stand up, because that person, after this complaint, there was some changes, and I don't want to go into the specifics. I think that's unfair to even that person, because that person who was, I would argue my abuser, right? I imagine they were going through some own shit in their own personal life. Like I tried to not take it too personally, but I think it's important to try to improve the learning environment for all of my colleagues.
Right. Those kind of actions, like you said, always reflect more on the individual that's
Mhm.
perpetuating those actions rather than the one that's receiving it.
Right.
And yeah, I'm sorry you had to go through that, Logan, but sounds like, you were able to make a positive change,
Mhm.
because you were willing to stand up and speak up for your colleagues. So
Right.
we all appreciate you for that. I can tell one last story and we can kind of wrap things up. I remember when I was a medical student, this was during the height of the COVID pandemic, and I was working in the ED, and I was we got a call through the radio that they're bringing in a person in respiratory failure. I think it was like an older lady, but basically, she was desatting. We had to intubate her.
Mhm.
So me and the attending ED physician, he tells me I'm coming in on this case. So we gown up, we have all our PPE on, and we have our masks on, we have the shields, And I remember it was just like very hard to hear because of how muffled you sound when you're wearing those N95 masks.
Right.
And especially with the chaos of somebody being brought into the ED, they're desatting, turning blue in front of you,
Mhm.
and you have to get a tube down their throat to help them breathe. It was just a chaotic environment. And long story short, I was successfully able to help with the intubation. And after we do intubation, of course, you need to bring in a portable chest
Right.
X-ray, get the imaging, make sure that tube is in the right place. And we got the image taken, and I swear it sounded like the doctor was yelling at me like to get Bridget, to get the nurse. I think the nurse's name was Brenda, and my colleague's name was Bridget.
Uh-huh.
So it was very hard to differentiate. But basically, I couldn't hear what name he was saying, and I thought he was asking the nurse to look over that X-ray. So I was like, hey, I poked my head out the room, and I was like, hey, like he's asking you to read this X-ray, like is it in the right place? And man, he just like flipped out
Ripped
on me. He's
into-
like, yeah, you nurses can't read X-rays. That has to be done by a physician. Like, what are you doing? Get the F out of the room.
Oh.
And I just kind of left. I was like very overwhelmed. We actually had to like have a long one-to-one after that, and I was just like,
Mhm.
hey, like, look, I couldn't freaking hear you through that mask.
Right.
And I mean, honestly, like I love that rotation. I
Mhm.
really love that guy. He like put a lot of trust in me, let me do a lot. So I always appreciated that.
Right.
But in that moment, yeah, it was a little bit jarring that he got like that frustrated.
Right.
But I guess in an emergent situation, and you never know what somebody's
Tempers
going
fly.
through.
Yeah.
And we can kind of wrap this up by saying that there's some colorful personalities in medicine.
Yeah, the stressful situations bring out, arguably the worst in us, right? But I feel like oftentimes in those stressful situations, at least in medicine, it doesn't seem like there's like a good powwow after, right? Where it's like, hey, let's talk about it. Like if there was a psychiatrist on every single team, maybe we'd all like, sing Kumbaya a little
Hey,
bit.
let's sit in a circle and
Let's talk about our feelings for a second. But I think maybe that's actually one of the best changes. We mentioned residency unions and all this other stuff, but like just acknowledging that there is such an emotional experience of working in medicine, because we do see some really horrible things at times, and we're dealing with high stress situations where just tempers fly, and I think if we had more just kind of like time built into our schedule to have experiences like that, I think it could be much better work environment. But it's nope. On to the next one. Let's go see the next patient. There's not even any time to have a breath.
It's an imperfect system filled with imperfect individuals.